Hello and welcome to a little Devblog update, if you will. This is just to keep people in the loop with what's going on with Fate's Crossing and the changes we're making. There's a lot of pretty big changes coming. This is also going to kind of serve as a small introductory video, as there are a lot of other people that will have been introduced to the game by this point. And so I'll also take this opportunity to kind of briefly go through the system and just explain everything so that we can describe the changes being made in accordance with this book. So first off, we have Chapter 0, Chapter Nil. There is no table of contents. We're working on it. But this basically just explains how tabletop role-playing games generally work. We explained that we are a D10 system. D10 systems traditionally work on a success-based system. So each character will have a dice pool based off of a statistic or their proficiency level or etc., and they will roll a number of D10 die equal to their dice pool in order to determine, and then sixes or aboves are successes, and that determines how many successes you get, determines whether or not you succeed in a particular task. It also goes into it basically just assumes you know nothing about tabletop role-playing games. Then we go into more Fates Crossing specific mechanics with proficiency checks and saving throws. This book is actually incorrect right now. There are more instances where dice pools are used. However, it's kind of also correct in the sense that most of those are preset or determined by other things other than attributes. Saving throws are divided into active saves and passive saves. Active saves are physical saving throws using strength, dexterity, or reaction. And that's usually your character doing something to get out of the way of something, and as such requires stamina. We'll get into more about the stamina system later. And then passive saving throws are ones that do not require stamina, but they're also a little bit harder to... they're a little less malleable. We go into our advantage and disadvantage system. We operate on levels of advantage, and those give one success or one less success depending on advantage or disadvantage respectively. This game always rounds down. And then we have our inspiration mechanic, which is fate. A lot of these rules will be clarified and improved. Next, we get into character creation. The general process is lineage and ancestry, and then attributes and statistics, and then developing a background. Developing a background is you basically get a starter set of EXP that you can use to buy, say, magic or weapons or armor or whatever, or core proficiencies, etc. And we'll get more into those as we go. So lineages have attribute improvements. They have a size. They have a movement. They get languages. They get specific traits and abilities unique to them. Which, by the way, will get balanced, as some are quite overtuned, some are quite undertuned. So we'll have some nerfs and buffs according to what we've observed throughout our current playtests. So they're subject to change. Resting rates do not exist anymore. And then ancestry is a sublineage or a subrace. Automaton. The armor values need to be reduced pretty much across the board. So light will probably stay 5, and then we'll have 10 and probably 15. It's probably what's going to happen. We're also going to try and work out a way to fix this. Arc Husk is too strong. These two are relatively okay, though. And then we also need to clarify these rulings. Demidrake is normally pretty fine. This is essentially a mystical experiment designed created by man to combine dragon-like entities and man. And so henceforth comes Demidrakes. Demidrakes are powerful individuals. They have natural weapons. They have armor. Generally, this is kind of the strength we want a lineage to be at. Dwarves are pretty cool. They get trading and other things depending on their ancestries. Dwarves are also in a pretty good spot. Felseer are pretty strong. We might change them a little bit, but for now, I think they are okay. Gnomes are fine. Gnomes might get something else added to this, but advantage on all saves against all magic is pretty damn good. Goblin is pretty fine. It has a lot of stuff. Cool stuff going on. You have your half dragon, which is essentially the Dungeons and Dragons dragonborn. You have halfling, which is a halfling. Human, they get extra experience during character creation. High Seer, which are high elves. Fell Seer are dark elves. And then Seath Seer, which you'll see later, are wood elves. Jakari are our copyright safe tiefling. Kobolds are kobolds because even the lizard kobolds are not are safe under copyright law, so we have kobolds. Orcs are orcs. They are cool. Seath Seer is the last one. All right, now let's get a little bit into attributes. Attributes go from 0 to 10. If a attribute is 0, that attribute is debilitated, means it doesn't work. There are two kinds of debilitation, absent or causal debilitation. Absent debilitation is something like like if you have no strength, you're a shadow because you can't interact with the physical world. Meanwhile, if someone gets their constitution removed, right, but they're a creature with constitution, but it just gets removed from them, they immediately die, right? They don't no longer have that stat. That stat is literally 0. And we have 8 attributes as opposed to D&D's 6. I believe Shadowrun has 9, so we have 8. And these are strength, dexterity, constitution, reaction, intellect, instinct, resolve, and charisma. Basically what we've done is we've taken the 2 best statistics in D&D and cut them both in half. So dexterity and reaction are cut in half, and then so dexterity is cut in half to dexterity and reaction, and then wisdom is cut in half into instinct and resolve. Lineages get saving through bonuses based on whatever attributes they get. So like Seath Seer, for example, if I chose instinct, I'd have +2 to instinct saving throws, dexterity saving throws, and then say I chose druid, I could also get resolve saving throws. Awesome. Now, attributes will determine statistics. So there's health, which is HP, vitality, mana, stamina. So mana is spent as a resource to cast spells. Stamina is a resource spent to cast, to perform actions, or also to cast spells. So mana is a long-term resource, which means it persists throughout the course of a day or something, because spells can be cast outside of combat. Stamina, however, is a combat-exclusive ability, statistic, rather. And that means it's a short-term resource, which means it is it fluctuates rapidly, and regeneration of it is very valuable. This is probably a good time to introduce something that we're thinking of adding back into the system. We used to have this level or advancement system. We recently did away with that to help encourage the Build-A-Bear, aimless kind of, you create your choose your own adventure kind of vibe. But that was largely necessary because people could get EXP at vastly different rates from one another. And I also don't like the current EXP system as that stands, which we'll get into later. But essentially, all you have to really hone in on is it's subject to change, and we might add what is called leveling or advancements back, where once your character reaches a certain EXP threshold beyond their character creation experience, you get to naturally improve health, mana, and stamina, as well as as well as attributes. That's just something we're thinking about. I would love your opinions on it. People who have played the system before and are experienced with it. This would give us a lot more freedom for, like, making damage a little bit more crazy, wacko, increasing mana costs, etc., etc. Awesome. So titles is basically just starting experience. Do you want to start? Usually it's novice, which is just 100 XP. Like, at what point is your character starting? And that's determined by the Fate Keeper. But assuming that it's novice, it'll be 100 EXP and 20 scale. So the character starts with 100 experience. Fun. So now we go into really the core system of the game, which is backgrounds. And this is where we'll interact with all of the core mechanics of the game and everything to do with Fate's Crossing. So we have proficiencies. So core proficiencies are proficiencies that everybody has, but they can get better at them. Secondary proficiencies are proficiencies that not necessarily everybody has innately, but so like playing an instrument, for example, is a secondary proficiency. Here's a cost. This table is a cost of core proficiencies, and then as also the EXP thresholds necessary to level up all leveled proficiencies. So we go into core proficiencies. Again, all creatures, all creatures in general can all roll for any of these at any time. However, this is where we want to get into. This is where I should get into some very important system updates that we're going to roll out in the next edition. So we have these core proficiency checks now that I've been developing, which across the board will now finally will have clarified and very specific rulings on what a character can do at any point in time, anytime they want, right? So what can I do with discernment, right? Which is not necessarily very well defined. Well, now you know. You can find intent, you can sense the motive of a creature, and all of these have specific rulings. And this is a huge step for the system. Skill monkeys will be viable now, in a sense. And we've also separated all of these actions into what are untrained and trained actions, which will mean if you have proficiency in insight discernment, for example, you will be able to determine influence. But if you don't have discernment, you will only be able to sense motive or find intent, right? So proficiency with certain things unlocks certain actions. Some proficiencies are fully untrained, some are fully trained, right? So, yeah. You can feel free to pause at any point and read any of these things. However, this is generally how it's going to go. And it'll be good. Next, secondary proficiencies. So, something to talk about that's quite important is we recently did a fighting style overhaul. So, when you have weapons, you choose a fighting style, and we also changed how weapon classes work in general, and we completely overhauled fighting styles. We made them much more useful. We made them much more defined. Anyone can technically pick any fighting style, even if it doesn't work for their weapon, which is kind of scuffed, but also kind of fun. And weapon classes themselves have fallen behind or have become busted just due to being, like, innately power crept by certain fighting styles that are meant for them, right? So, like, so that's going to be addressed when we update next. So weapon classes will be a little bit more easily defined. But that's neither here nor there. If you're new here, let's go through secondary proficiencies. So, armor is very simple. You can wear armor without egregious penalties. Arts, you are proficient in a certain kind of art, which allows you to use influence performance checks with that art. And that does several different things. And also, if you're a bardic invoker, that will determine, that will modify several things for your casting as well. So, like, a brass caster has more AoE on their spells. A actor or a singer doesn't need to have a focus, right? So they don't need an instrument. A dancer needs to move, but also doesn't need a focus. A harpsichord player can channel, I think, 2 invocations at once instead of 1. So, and that functions basically like concentration in Dungeons and Dragons, is channeling. Which, as you can imagine, is really, really good, but you have to play on a harpsichord, which is a big-ass piano, essentially. So, just fun things. Then there's language. Language is in a weird spot because it has to be expensive because you're learning a whole language, but you get nothing mechanically from it other than roleplay flavor. So, it's largely worthless, but it has to be here because languages exist. And different languages are important to have, so it's just weird. Circles of Magick. So, the way magic is divided, instead of I'm a sorcerer, I'm a warlock, I am a wizard, I am a witch, I am a cleric and a paladin, we now have circles of magic, and within those circles of magic are several different archetypes and power fantasies and things to choose from. So sorceries have archetypes of sorcery. Sorcery is elemental magic. So pyromancy, cryomancy, umbramancy, solomancy, etc. None of that's changing. I recently did an entire overhaul of all of these systems within sorcery and wizardry and witchcraft and invocations, and given very vast, which we'll even go over in this video, right? But Magick is in a really good spot right now. Trades are for crafting, so we will eventually have a crafting system. It used to be a leveled proficiency, now it's not. It's kind of just going to be, it's kind of just going to have to be scaled based off of what an FK desires, right? And an FK is going to have to look at smithing and be like, hey, your smithings shouldn't go this high, yada yada. It's not going to be a leveled proficiency anymore. But it will determine, so if you're a cook, you can provide buffs to your party during rests, right? If you're a smith, during resting time, you have time to make entirely new weapons, repair weapons and armor, etc. If you're a woodworker, you can make structures or even puppetry, right? These war puppets. Tinkering is a little bit of everything, and it's about traps and tool making. Textiles is clothing and magical clothing. Something that's not well specified but does exist is magical crafting, which is the combination of witchcraft and trade. So if you are a if you're a smith and a witch, right, then you're suddenly a runesmith. If you're a cook and a witch, you're an alchemist. So these things kind of play into each other, and you can do a lot of things with it. I once played a witch alchemist who, literally, that was all she did. She had no weapons, no armor, no nothing, and it was very fun. It was actually a lot of fun. It was super cool. Vehicles, again, a little redundant, but necessary to have. They have to be here because vehicles exist, and we want people to have knowledge of using them. And then weapons. By far, our magnum opus, our most proud thing, is our weapons. And it's unfortunate that they've fallen behind. We have a vast selection of weapons and weapon classes, and all of these weapon classes play completely unique from one another. and even some of them have unique weapon. Like some of them are completely unique weapons. Like Kusarigamas do not belong in a weapon class. So then we have after proficiencies, we go over traits, abilities, spells, hurdles, etc. Hurdles are as they've always been. Minor hurdles offer 5 extra experience during character creation. You can choose 2 hurdles, and only 1 hurdle can be major. So you get 5 experience for a minor one, which provides a minor debuff to your character in exchange for experience. And the idea behind these hurdles is that they are something that your character can overcome or can provide unique roleplay moments or things of that sort. That's the whole idea behind them. It's just if you make your character good, you get money. that's all it is. Moderate hurdles offer 10 extra experience, and then major hurdles offer 20. So all in all, you can get up to 30 extra experience, which means you have 130 experience, which is a whole other weapon class or armor or 2 core proficiencies, right? It's a lot of things you can do. But after you procure hurdles and core proficiencies and stuff, then you get your starting traits, abilities, spells, right? And these are the actual things, these are the actual benefits that your character has, and it's all based off of their proficiencies, core proficiencies and secondary proficiencies. Next, Chapter 2 goes into inventory and equipment, because the assumption is you'll skip ahead to what you need to look at. We'll just quickly go over this. There's encumbrance, because game needs encumbrance. Lol, you don't have infinite inventory. But it's very, as you can see, it is very silly and very lax. It just needs to exist because it needs to exist. We go a little bit into materials and things that exist. We go into our currency system. So a bit is basically like copper, a fract is like a silver, and a scale is like a gold. And so 10 bits equal 1 fract, but 100 fract equals 1 scale. So if you're good at math, 1 scale equals 10,000 bits. Fun. Armor is separated into light, medium, heavy armor. Light armor is a vibe. Provides light protection, but it's also a little bit less encumbering, right? Medium armor is the same thing. Heavy armor is the biggest bang for your buck, but also the most encumbering and hard to work with, right? There is an argument to be made to say, yeah, you can't put plate armor on yourself, right? You need a buddy. Something that is also very cool is we introduced armor stacking. So AR, or armor, is the benefit that armor provides, and that gives you an AR rating, which all damage that you take that is physical, so slashing, piercing, bludgeoning damage, all of that damage is reduced by your AR. Armor can also add resistances. You can willingly get rid of some combat prowess, which is basically we'll get into combat prowess later. Combat prowess in difficulty class for your spells, and reduce your dex pools and initiative and stuff. You can take debuffs by stacking armor in order to get more protection. So eventually, with 4 armors on, you might have 36 armor, but you can't move because you have insane amount of layers of armor on. There's also arguments to be made that these would give exhaustion as well, having heavier armors on or stacked armors. We'll see how it plays out, but it's something that we might add. Armor modifications are things that can be modified for benefit, and these are all the armors we have in the game thus far. Then we go into shields. There are different shields. They're also light, medium, and heavy. Fun stuff. Shield traits. Basically, shields, you react with a block, and you add the AR to that attack if you succeed, which is nice. Then we go into arts. So arts are separated into 6 categories, I think, which is brass, harpsichord, magic, which is like stage magic, and then percussion, strings, and woodwinds. at least for equipment. There's also acting, singing, and dancing, but those don't require, you don't need tools for that, because you can just kind of do that. There's a bunch of other things that you don't really need to worry too much about. Containers provide extra carrying capacity. Foci, if you are a witch or a wizard, you need foci to channel your spells through. Foci also grant what are called arcane charges, which allow you to cast spells that you know or spells you don't know, depending on what equipment you have, based on the level of arcane charges, etc. It's very simple and intuitive once you get it down, but it can be a little concerning at first. Potions are potions. Health potions grant temporary HP. Mana potions grant temporary mana. Stamina potions grant temporary stamina. And then a healing potion would restore your HP. A mana regeneration potion would regenerate your mana, etc., etc. And then there's a list of miscellaneous supplies and ammunitions and land vehicles, stuff like that. Now we get into the creme de la creme weapons. So weapons are divided into 13 weapon classes. These are axes, bludgeons, which are like maces and mauls. Sorry, not a maul, but like a mace or a pernac, right? Curved swords, which are curved blades, sabers, scimitars, shamshears is technically the correct term, which we might actually change that name to, since scimitar is a sword slur. Great swords, so the Zweihander, the Montante, etc. Claymore. Hammers, so hammer. Knives, which are daggers. Loading weapons, which are crossbows and eventually guns, although we won't have guns for a while. Long swords, which are katanas and bastard swords. Polearms, which are polearms. Prep weapons, which are bows, so you prep an arrow and then you shoot it. Short swords, thrusting swords, tower swords. Short swords are like arming swords, thrusting swords are rapiers or small swords, tower swords are anime swords. And then there's 5 unique weapons that don't fall underneath a class, and they have unique traits and stuff like that, and their own unique trees in a lot of cases. And then here is our list of weapons. It takes up a whole page. Man, I love this table. So each weapon has its own traits. So a brutal weapon can make brutal attacks, which you spend an extra stamina, and you crit on a die, right? So you deal an extra damage, basically, like an extra die of damage. We'll get more into what critting actually means when we go to combat, and we take a look at that. If a two-handed weapon is two-handed, that means it's two-handed, and you have to use it in 2 hands. But you usually get a larger damage pool. Super heavy weapons need 6 or more strength to be carried. Loading weapons are loaded, and so they spend their stamina to load rather than to fire. But yeah, these are the variety of weapons we have. It is quite a vast list. There is argument to be made to cut it down, but I like it, so we're probably going to keep it. Next, we enter Chapter 3, and that's where we go into adventure progression, travel, stuff like that. There's travel speeds, terrain rules, climate rules, downtime and rest rules. So the way downtime works is, which is really just resting rules. You determine your comfort based off of conditions, which can be, are you in a walled settlement? Did you sleep in a bed? Do you have all your food? etc., etc., etc. Are you feeling okay today? Did you see your therapist? Stuff like that. And then, what I don't necessarily like right now is we get a number of successes, a number of dice pool based on their comfort, which can be allocated into successes, etc. We might just make this, instead of a dice pool, we might just make this an amount of points, right, that you can just allocate into things, which might be a little bit better. Nourishment. There's rules for nourishment if your DM is a piece of shit. If you're malnourished, you have bad things happen to you. There's 5 different kinds of movement. There's walking, climbing, swimming, flying, and burrowing. Those are all very self-explanatory. Climbing has specific rules, but if you have a speed, you can do it without anything. There's falling and suffocation, flying and burrowing. Then we have a whole sense system. So senses for creatures are relative to themselves, and so is stealth and viewing things. So stealth is relative, which means you can be hidden from one creature but not hidden from another. This is not Baldur's Gate 3, right? Where if you're in any of the red areas, you better hope you rolled your stealth good, or you just get seen, right? That's not how that works. Because like anyone the game views as hostile or you know what I mean. So senses are fully relative. You can be seen from one end and not seen from another. And we have several modifiers to determine what senses can do and what they are. So we have visual senses, auditory senses, olfactory senses, which is like smell, tactile senses, and the two extra senses, which are the arcane sense and the mental sense. Then we have a list of special senses. All of these are very self-explanatory and explain themselves if you read them. Light and obscurement is a thing. It's hard to see people if they're in the darkness. Stealth, we go into how stealth works and how stealth is relative. Passive perception is a statistic determined by instinct. Pickpocketing rules, lockpicking rules. Then we go into all of our conditions. We have a lot of conditions in this game. Read up on them. Character progression, acuity, right? All of this is pretty good. We might get rid of acuity and just make it EXP. So currently the way you progress in the system is you get acuity, and that transfers 1-to-1 into a dice that gets rolled as a dice pool at the end of the day while you're resting and gets converted into EXP. Right now, it's a little bit too variable for my taste, and I think acuity maybe should literally just be you just get XP, right? Which might be preferable. So it might just be you get acuity, which gets turned into XP at the end of the day if you rest, right? Now we go into combat. So the way combat works in Fate's Crossing is a little bit different from other systems. Initiative is a flat number. You don't roll for initiative. You just have a turn, and the turn can fluctuate throughout the round, but you don't roll for it anymore. So now there's no more, oh, you encounter this guy, now let's interrupt the flow of combat to roll our initiatives for 10 minutes and figure out our modifiers and do that and do other things. And no, we just have our turns, right? And if you have a really high initiative, you can take multiple turns in the turn order, which is kind of fun. But it all has to be within our stamina actions. So all things cost stamina, and you only regenerate 1 stamina at the start of each of your turns. So if you are bad at managing your stamina, maybe you can't react to something. Maybe you can't do something that you wanted to do on the next turn. Maybe you spend 2 stamina, you have 3 left, but you have to react to 2 things that have you. Now you can't cast that big spell that costed 3 stamina that you wanted to do, right? Just this alone adds such a level of problem solving and creativity that D&D just simply doesn't have. Because in D&D, all you do is you take your action, you might take a bonus action, and you might move. But if you're a melee character, you just move, and then you're there, and then you just take your action, and then your 1 bonus action. But no, you can take as many actions during your turn as you want, and as many actions during your turn as you think are worth it to keep yourself safe by the end of your turn, right? And so the level of decision making and stuff is very unique and doesn't really exist in many other systems other than this one, and I think we do it really well. You can react to stuff by blocking, dodging, or striking. So if you block, that is, I want to block something. If you dodge, that is, I want to dodge something. If you strike, that means I'm just gonna hit you while you hit me. There's also special actions. So an initiate special action, for example, has to be done at the start of your turn. Commitment ends your turn. Vulnerable provokes opportunity attacks. Limited means this specific action can only be used once per turn. So I can only use an inventory interaction. So I use special action once per turn. I can only help once per turn. Although that already is whatever. Damage types, lots of damage types. Um, damage gets reduced by resistance or armor or immunity or whatever, right? Different kinds of attacks, rules of engagement, right? There's reach rules. Then there's what is combat prowess. So we don't roll to attack here. So if you're trained with a weapon, we're going to assume you hit with it. If you have a CP of 0, your attack doesn't work, right? And certain things can raise or lower a CP in the middle of an attack, right? Before an attack resolves. So combat prowess is basically your weapon DC, right? So you make an attack, and a creature has an opportunity to spend a stamina to react to that attack. And if they beat your CP, they react to the attack successfully. If they don't react to the attack successfully, and they take the full damage. There are certain situations where you want to react. There are certain situations where you don't. Again, it's all very situational, but it's intuitive because if I have a bunch of armor on, sure, I'm probably not going to spend much time reacting to sword strikes and stuff that aren't going to do any damage to me because I'm in full armor, right? There's a lot of interesting things, a lot of moving parts, but I think it all feels quite intuitive and simple once you get the system down. Exponential crits. So how does critically striking work if you can't roll for an attack? I can't roll a nat 20 on my attack, right? I can't roll a nat 10 and it does something, right? No. Instead, if you roll... So say I have a scimitar, for example, which I believe is a d12 or a d10 of damage. For sake of argument, let's say a shamshear is a d10 of damage. If I roll a 10... on that shamshear, I get to roll the damage die again and add it. I get to roll the damage die again and add it to that attack. So if I roll a 10, suddenly, and then I roll again, and then I roll an 8, suddenly I've done 18 damage. That's how crit works. And then we also have malleable crit ranges based on certain traits, abilities, etc. There's another statistic called vitality. Vitality is basically an extra health bar. So if I drop from 15 HP to 0 HP, and I have 2 vitality, on my turn I can spend a vitality and go back up to 15 HP. It's basically just like you have your own boss stages, essentially. There's also things like elevation, flanking, covering, concealment, just all of the things that a tabletop role-playing game has to have. Crafting is being made. And then we get into traits and abilities. So this is very straightforward, and also, for core proficiencies, which are athletics, concealment, influence, deception, performance, etc., all of these are also being vastly overhauled. So as you can see here, there is so much more. There is so much more content about to be added to all of these. Currently, I'm almost done with sleight of hand, and all of these are going to be added in soon enough, right? But you can get traits and abilities that your character has through these core proficiencies and their concentrations. And then there's also armor traits and abilities, so you can get better with armor. And then there's weapon traits and abilities. But you also have a fighting style. So an archer is good at archery. An assassin is really sneaky and does sneak attack damage. A berserker is basically a fucking... What was it? A barbarian from D&D. The Conqueror has an innate +1 critical strike range. So if I have that scimitar with Conqueror, I don't crit on 8s anymore. I crit on 7s and 8s. So that's a 25% chance to critically strike every attack, which is kind of fun. Berserker is in the run for getting nerfed. Assassin is fine. Archer is fine. Conqueror is relatively fine. There's dual wielding, so if I have 2 one-handed swords, right, or a versatile sword and another one-handed sword, I can enter this unique stance that only dual wielders can use, where they can attack, overpower someone with 2 attacks at once, or save 1 for blocking, right? Cool stuff like that. The duelist, right, where they put their hand behind they do the Count Dooku, you know what I mean? Eerie, which is literally Devil May Cry grade system, right? I go from E to S grade, and then I get a bunch of benefits for being unescrate and can use all of my cool abilities. The gladiator, who's all about performative fighting, right? Something that we're probably going to add is improvised weapons into this fighting style. So you get probably innately just an ability to use chairs and tables and rocks and shit and just throw them at people, right? Dealing extra damage. The marksman is like the fantasy sniper, right? The ranger is all about preparatory fighting, right? I want to spend as much time as possible to prepare. I want to plan my fights out as much as I can. So I mark someone, and I get a bonus to tracking them and dealing extra damage to them, and etc., etc., etc. The sharpshooter is like is a lot like the gladiator, but just for ranged weapons, right? And they have unique things about them. The stalwart is all about being the biggest wall and just inflicting as many conditions on other people as possible. The tactician is all about planning during a fight and before a fight, right? The vanguard is all about being the biggest wall possible that cannot be crossed. I just am the biggest boy. The warden is all about protecting allies. Then we get into general weapon traits and abilities. These can technically apply. These are abilities or traits that apply to multiple weapon classes. Not necessarily all of them. You still have to read through them. So, like the flourish can only be used with a sword. So if I have a polearm, I don't want to take flourish, right? Or lacerate as part of a slashing attack. I don't want to take this with a hammer. But just a bit of reading can solve these issues. Then there are stances. And stances can be entered at the start of your turn and are applied during the whole turn. And they can do good things, they can do bad things, they can do good things for bad things. They just change up how you play the game. And then we have weapon class traits and abilities. All of these are going to get updated, reworked, modernized, etc., etc., etc. But a lot of them are still going to stay the same. Like whips are pretty much, they're the most recently made weapon class, so they're going to stay how they are. Finally, we get into magic and spells, which is very fun. So we have spell labels, which are like damage types. This is an area effect spell, a direct spell, a self spell. This is the buff spell, damage spell. And this will be useful in spellcraft, which will happen. Then there's resources, right? So mana, stamina. But then invokers use spirit, which, if you're an invoker, you gain spirit based off of your invocation proficiency level. Arcane charges can be used for in place of mana for spells. Then we have sorcery. Sorcery has 6 different archetypes, which are aeromancy, cryomancy, pyromancy, solomancy, terramancy, umbermancy. Everything was fine before the Fire Nation attacked. Sorcerers get to choose their casting stat. All other circles have a specific casting stat. And sorcerers have wild magic, but instead of a D20 table, it's a D100 table. Some of these things do not need to exist. Like maybe reducing yourself to 1 HP is pretty bad, and maybe we should change that. But it'll be a D100 table that is fully fleshed out and cool. Sorcerers are unique in that they don't have concentrations. But they have very similar things that would apply to concentrations. Concentrations are basically choosing one of those subsections and getting benefits based on the subsection you choose. And we'll go more into that when we get to wizardry. But here are the spells. Lovely spells. Yay, spells. Okay, so wizardry is in 7 schools. And these are Abjuration, which is protective magic, Chronomancy, which is time magic, Conjuration, which is creation magic, Divination, which is information magic, Evocation, which is energy magic, essentially, Illusion, which is sense magic, and Transmutation, which is physical change. So, wizardry is intellect. It's a studied magic. It's a studied form of magic. Wizards inherit this interesting mechanic called Overcast, which you spend your whole turn and to cast one spell, and that spell gets a myriad of benefits. You also spend extra resources. If you're an abjurer, so you can also choose one of these schools, and you get specific benefits based on the school you choose. So if you get an abjuration school, if you choose abjuration school, you get a ward of layers, which reduces damage you receive, which is kind of fun. Here are some abjuration spells. Chronomancy, you get temporal shifting, you get tempor, and you can raise or lower your initiative, and then you can also give people advantage or disadvantage. Very cool stuff. Conjuration, you get a free familiar. Divination, you get portent, which is just wizard portent. You get, as evocation, you get spellcraft, which is changing the damage type of evocation spells to any elemental damage type. Illusion, you get a free illusion that you can just use to distract people. Transmute self, you literally get attribute points. Very cool stuff. Now, witchcraft is prepared magic and natural magic, magic of the natural world. You get charms, curses, nature, necromancy, summoning, and wards. Spells can be either cast sometimes as hexes, sometimes as boons, and sometimes as rituals, depending on the magic and depending on the spell. And those change depending on those change the effects of the spell, but are generally in line with the same spell. So if I command someone as a hex, I can give a one-word command, and these are some examples. But if you use the ritual on them, you get a number of commands free per day. But if they succeed once, they're fine. So if you get a really stupid person, you can just command them permanently. But it's a nightmare to cast, right? That's the whole idea behind rituals. And then boons are specifically you can give them to someone else as an item or something, and they can cast it for free. And that's and boons and rituals must be prepared during rest. So you're using some of your preparation successes that we went over in order to cast those. Generally, witchcraft is in a very good spot. We have charms, hypnotic pattern, curses get a witch mark, nature gets wild shape for free, necromancy gets raise remnant and speak with dead. This will be reworked, I think. Communion. We're going to make necromancers a little bit better, I think. Summoning, you get an eidolon, and these are the rules of eidolons. We will go more into these later. Well, we won't go more into these later, but you can look more into this on your own time. And then wards, you get a ward which gives resistance in an area permanently. Fun stuff. Invocation is divine magic or gifted magic. There's astral, which you get free fate points every rest, which is kind of fun. Witches use instinct, and invocation uses charisma. Astral invocations, again, are connected to the astral plane and divination. Fun stuff. You can use astral fate, cast astral fate to be fate, or you can use astral fate to cast unknown spells or other things. Then, at Proficiency 1, all invocations have, all invocation circles is what they're called. All invocation domains, which is what they're called, get Proficiency 1, general Proficiency 1 traits that you can pick up. And then, at Proficiency Level 2, you get a pathway in a domain of invocation. So, you can get cuddly with oozes as an astral. You can be a fate weaver or an oracle. Oracles have curses that they choose. So much shit. Lots of content. But, and this might be overwhelming, right? But the brilliant part about this whole game is that you only have to look at the content that you want to look at. If I, as a character, want to go into astral invocations, I only have to view these 5 pages, right? And then I know all about astral. And if I'm not going into anything else, then my character's done. You know what I mean? So you can be as granular with the system as you want to as a player, and you're still going to get a relatively decent build, I think, which is nice. But we're working on balance and stuff. Then we go into bardic invocations, which are, instead of gifted magic, it's performed magic. It's magic channeled through something greater than yourself, which is performance. We have the Lore Keeper, the Muse, and the Bladesinger. Cool. Caustic invocations are I want to destroy everything, rot everything. You have Pestilence or Virulent. Chthonic invokers are you have the Demon Blade, the Fiendish Tome, or the Occult. And Occult people get fun things. The Fiendish Tome gets spells of any circle that they want, which is kind of sick. And then the Occult, you choose an Occult Dominion, and you get benefits based off of that Dominion. Really fun stuff. Divine Magic, you can be a Cleric, or an Oath Keeper, or a Paladin, right? And you get, depending on the oath you choose, you get certain, as an Oath Keeper, you get certain things, yada, yada, yada. You're getting how it's going, right? And then Eldritch. Finally, Eldritch. We get Tenebrous Empowerment, which makes the conditions inflicted by anything, not just your invocations, worse, which is kind of fun. And then, also Order Invocations. Normally, invokers can only cast one invocation per turn because they use a unique resource for it and don't use stamina for it. Order says, screw that, I'm going to gain disparity, and I can cast as many invocations as I want, which is kind of fun. And that's the whole game right now. So, in a little less than an hour, I've showed you what we're changing, what's going on, our thought process. If you watched through the whole video, thanks, I guess. I'm not going to bother editing this video very much at all. So, this is just going to be a 51-minute ramble, essentially. Yeah, so, thanks.